Alright, just a quick note before we get into this today. My voice may sound different, and this may sound like a different person, but this is still Anthony, and this is still Return to Tradition. I just have a head cold. It's definitely a cold, too. And not that other thing. My sinuses are all in chaos right now. I can't sleep, and in general my nose and throat are a mess. And if my voice sounds this different to me, it probably sounds that different to you. But my chest is fine, and so I'm not that worried. But I will be keeping this one relatively short today, so thanks for your patience, and on to the topic of the day. My question for you today is, will you submit? It's a question I am posing for those who listen to the papal encyclicals I post on the weekends. And this one may seem odd to them because last Saturday, that is Saturday, July 25th, 2020, I posted a papal encyclical by Gregory XVI on submission to civil authority, and some misconstrued it as a call to submit to Caesar in this time of crisis. But I ask, will you submit? The key to understanding when our submission to the state is required is rather straightforward. Our Lord told us to render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and unto God what belongs to God. Now, some have, in the classic way that the moderns often do, taken those words in that lesson from our Lord to be an endorsement of the separation of church and state. It's not, but rather a recognition that the state and the church have their own realms of concern. The church has always taught that the state and the church should work in partnership for the common good. It's a point that doesn't really matter in our day and age when the church and the state have such different goals that are obviously not compatible, that any partnership is rather silly to attempt. And when it is attempted, it's always done on the terms of the world. Just look at the various sustainable development programs launched by the Vatican, and you'll be hard-pressed to find anything Catholic about them. So, when are we called to submit to what the civil authorities ask of us? Well, first, when what they are demanding properly belongs to Caesar. So, for instance, Caesar has no right whatsoever to dictate how, when, or even if people are free to worship God and in a manner pleasing to him. That is not in the realm of Caesar. But since the Reformation, Caesar has tried to dictate this to Catholics. But the second point on this is something also people are going to be missing, and that's this. Is what Caesar is demanding, does it defy the natural law? That is, does it run afoul of the law of God? If so, you obviously have no duty to submit to Caesar. That is because Caesar is then trying to claim things that belong rightfully to God. This is where we get the Moloch issue, or the tendency of government to crush small businesses and destroy the ability of men to provide a living for their families, and all manner of other issues that can broadly be said to be related to Catholic social teaching. Render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, but not what belongs to God. The question of submission is critical to our day. The state of California has reissued its order to close pretty much, everything, except for, it seems, the kinds of nighttime establishments where the sins that James Martin seems to defend are done as a matter of business. A certain kind of club, shall we say. This, coupled with the incoherent and frankly insulting orders coming from Caesar that bans religious worship and curtails normal business activity, all endorsing certain kinds of political speech and activity, has begged the question of submission to Caesar. And that is because we live in a time now of great deception. Our so-called leaders are openly lying to us, and I suspect that the public actually knows this, more so than is normal. After all, it's been a few generations since Americans and Westerners in general trusted their governments. That trust must be at an all-time low, with governments endorsing the activities of the agents of chaos, but saying to people who just want to go to church that going to church is too risky. And what better example of this than in the recent decision by the American High Court that backed the state of Nevada's decision to limit attendance at church services but allowed casinos to remain open with few, if any, restrictions. I'd ask if the bishops of Nevada are submitting to that rule, but we already know the answer. They have rendered unto Caesar what belongs to God, for how we worship and the right to worship is something that does not belong to the state. It belongs to God, not Caesar. So I have one example of a cardinal, though, who doesn't have the best track record for defending the Catholic faith, actually doing the right thing for once and refusing to submit. The story comes from Gloria TV. Enough is enough. Spanish cardinal defies the state. The gist of the story is rather straightforward. Caesar in Spain had decided to limit the number of people who can attend Mass to 10, regardless of the size of the building. Sound familiar? This Cardinal Juan Jose Omea decided to reject the order of the Catalonian regional government and said the Mass publicly, with more than the legally permitted number. Cardinal Omea said a requiem Mass for those who fell to the affliction, and in so doing he remembered to do his actual duty as a bishop of the church. I don't know his track record on other issues, though. I have it on good authority that it's not great. But in this regard, he deserves the support of the faithful. So keep him in your prayers. Quoting the article for some context, quote, Cardinal Omea expected the restriction to be lifted on Friday, but the decision was delayed. Because the invitations for the Mass were already sent, he refused to cancel it. Omea announced legal action against the state. For him, it is not justifiable that up to 1,000 tourists are allowed to be in the basilica. Yet only 10 faithful may attend Mass. The building can hold 9,000 people. Quim Torra, the president of the Catalonian government, ordered his agents to investigate the Mass, randomly accusing Omea of what he himself was doing, having, quote, forgotten the Constitution and human rights, end quote. That's actually pretty rich, right? The slighted government official accused the cardinal of doing what he himself was already doing. But that's par for the course. On this one issue, Cardinal Omea did not submit. Will you? We go along with restrictions to the Mass. How about the demand now being imposed by Caesar to shroud the Imago Dei, to don what I will call a face hugger? It's a pop culture reference, and you have to have seen certain kinds of bad movies to really get the reference. But will you submit to that? There are scenarios where donning the face hugger is a good idea, I guess, but for the most part, it makes little sense. Will you submit to that demand by Caesar? In some places, Caesar is demanding that the face hugger be used even in the home. Now that sounds absurd, but Caesar now feels emboldened, especially since the prelates of the church are submitting to his authority in virtually all things. Catholics are not called to be participants in this wicked system that is unfolding, a system that will surely demand us to use experimental bioproducts that may or may not work, and that may actually be immoral in how they were made, yet many will submit. Will you? I'll leave it at that. Please pray for the Church that she may find her spine in these days where courage from our prelates is what is sorely needed. Thanks for listening. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.